Have you ever wondered, how can a candy that looks so harmless, so sweet and colorful, be banned in Europe, yet still end up in your child's lunchbox in America or other parts of the world? It's true. Behind the shiny wrappers, the rainbow hues, and the playful marketing campaigns lies a controversial reality. Some candies are blacklisted in Europe, but remain perfectly legal and widely sold in the US. This story isn't just about candy. It's about how nations prioritize public health differently, how science, politics, and profit collide, and why something considered normal in one country may be labeled dangerous in another. To understand it, we need to rewind to the 1970s and 1980s, when Europe began paying closer attention to children's health and food safety. Scientists started raising alarms about artificial food dyes, the very chemicals responsible for making candies so bright and attractive. Their studies suggested these dyes could trigger allergic reactions, stomach irritation, and, most importantly, a possible link to hyperactivity in children. Meanwhile, in the US, the candy industry had a different story. A massive consumer market, fierce competition, and more lenient regulations meant these products not only survived but thrived, becoming nostalgic symbols of childhood for generations. So, what exactly is this banned candy that Europe rejected but American kids still munch on? And why is there such a sharp divide in how two regions of the world handle the same ingredients? This journey will take us from scientific labs to heated debates in Parliament, and finally back to the family kitchen, where parents are left with a tough choice: sweet convenience or long-term safety. To understand why certain candies are banned in Europe yet remain common in American lunchboxes, we must look at the ingredients, the industries, and the institutions behind them. This is not simply a tale about sweets. It is a story about chemistry, corporations, regulators, and parents caught in between. The candy in question. At the center of this controversy are brightly colored candies. Think of chewy gummies, coated chocolates, hard lollipops, and rainbow-colored cereals marketed as fun for kids. What unites them? Artificial food dyes, especially a group often referred to as the Southampton Six. These include tartrazine, Yellow 5 E102, Allura Red AC, Red 40 E129, Sunset Yellow, Yellow 6 E110, Ponceau 4R, Red 4, E124, Carmozine, E122, Quinoline Yellow, E104. In Europe, many of these dyes are either outright banned or must carry a warning label that states, "may have an adverse effect on activity and attention in children." In the US, however, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, continues to approve their use, provided manufacturers stay within regulated limits. The scientists? The debate escalated in the early 2000s when a team of British researchers conducted what became known as the Southampton Study, 2007. Their findings suggested a strong link between artificial dyes and hyperactive behavior in children. Parents, doctors, and consumer advocacy groups demanded action. The European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, responded by enforcing stricter rules, while the FDA in the US called for more research. The corporations for candy giants like Mars, Nestle, and Hershey, the stakes were massive. Reformulating products for Europe meant either using natural colorings like beetroot red, turmeric yellow, or spirulina blue, or risking bans and consumer backlash. But in the US, where regulations were looser, these same companies often stuck to cheaper synthetic dyes. So ironically, the very same candy brand may look different in Europe than it does in America. A pack of Skittles, for instance, sold in London, may use natural fruit extracts, while in the US it still contains Yellow 5 and Red 40. The parents and children. Perhaps the most overlooked voices in this debate are those of parents. In Europe, parents often demand transparency and caution, pushing companies to adopt safer ingredients. In the US, however, aggressive marketing, colorful packaging, and a culture of convenience make it harder for parents to resist. Many do not even know that the candy in their child's lunchbox is banned across the Atlantic. And here lies the unsettling truth. Children in America are effectively part of a live, decades-long experiment. The same snack may be reformulated for European kids' safety, but remain unchanged for US kids' enjoyment. But what happened when the scientific warnings turned into public outrage? How did the candy industry and governments respond when evidence of harm became impossible to ignore? That's where the real drama begins. By the mid-2000s, the debate around artificial dyes in candy had reached a boiling point. What had started as quiet scientific concern was now a global flashpoint between parents, scientists, lawmakers, and candy corporations. The Southampton Shock, 2007. The real turning point came with the Southampton study, published in The Lancet in 2007. Researchers tested drinks containing a cocktail of artificial dyes and preservatives on groups of children. The results were striking. Children exposed to these additives displayed higher levels of restlessness, impulsivity, and difficulty concentrating. Parents reported sudden shifts in behavior, describing kids as bouncing off the walls. For the first time, there was large-scale, peer-reviewed evidence suggesting a direct link between artificial dyes and hyperactivity in children. Europe responded swiftly. Within just a few years, the EU required warning labels on products containing these dyes may have an adverse effect on activity and attention in children. Some countries, like the UK, pressured manufacturers to phase out the dyes entirely. Major brands reformulated their products in Europe. Skittles, M&M's, Fanta, all switched to natural colors. Meanwhile, in the US, the reaction was starkly different. The FDA reviewed the Southampton study but concluded that the evidence was inconclusive. No new bans, no warning labels. Instead, the FDA recommended further research. Corporate divide. This created an unusual scenario. The same candy brand had two faces. In Europe, natural dyes like beetroot red, paprika extract, or spirulina blue replaced synthetic ones. In America, the same candy continued to shine with yellow 5, red 40, and blue 1. Parents who traveled between the two continents often found themselves stunned. Why was the candy marketed as safe in one place, reformulated for another? The answer lay in economics. Artificial dyes are cheap, stable, and vibrant. They make candies look irresistibly bright while keeping production costs low. Natural alternatives, by contrast, are more expensive and less predictable in shade and shelf life. Public outrage and lawsuits. In the US, concerned parents and advocacy groups refused to stay silent. By the 2010s, petitions demanding bans on artificial dyes gained hundreds of thousands of signatures. Lawsuits were filed against companies accused of misleading parents with labels like kid-friendly or natural flavor. One famous case came in 2013 when advocacy groups targeted Kraft AD's iconic mac and cheese for using yellow 5 and yellow 6, dyes banned in Europe. Under public pressure, Kraft reformulated its recipe, proving that change was possible when consumers demanded it. But candy was another story. With billions at stake, the industry dug in its heels, insisting that artificial dyes were safe within FDA limits. The turning point. By the late 2010s, the pressure grew too strong to ignore. Nestle and Mars pledged to phase out artificial dyes in some products. Whole Foods and Trader Joe's banned artificial dyes from all store-brand foods. But many mainstream candies, especially those sold in convenience stores, remained unchanged. The climax of this battle revealed a deep truth. What we allow in our food is not just about science. It's about politics, profit, and consumer power. But what were the consequences of this divide? How did society react when Europe banned the dyes but the US let them remain? That's the story we'll explore next. The battle over artificial dyes didn't end in scientific journals or boardrooms. It spilled directly into kitchens, classrooms, and grocery aisles. The consequences of Europe's stricter stance versus America's leniency reshaped not only public trust in food safety, but also the way families approached something as simple as candy. Europe, reformulation, and consumer confidence. In Europe, once the warning labels became law, candy manufacturers had a choice. Either risk alarming parents with bold red-letter warnings on every pack, or switch to natural alternatives. Most chose the latter. Skittles replaced synthetic dyes with fruit and vegetable extracts. M&M's in the UK began using natural colors like spirulina for blue and paprika for red. Even sodas like Fanta reformulated, trading artificial dyes for natural beta-carotene and carrot extract. For European parents, this felt like a victory. The shelves in their supermarkets began reflecting their concerns, and many trusted that the EU had taken their children's health seriously. Food companies, once defensive, began advertising their switch to no artificial colors, using it as a marketing advantage. The United States, a culture of skepticism. Across the Atlantic, the story was murkier. Despite decades of petitions, hearings, and lawsuits, the FDA's stance remained. The evidence isn't strong enough to ban artificial dyes. Products continued to hit shelves with the same ingredients Europe had already rejected. This divide created a wave of consumer skepticism. Parents began to ask, why does my child's candy contain chemicals banned overseas? Why does the same brand use safer ingredients in Europe but not here? Am I paying the price for corporate convenience? As a result, many American families turned to niche brands and grocery stores that promised all-natural snacks. Chains like Whole Foods and Trader Joe's made a name for themselves by banning artificial dyes in store-brand products. Yet mainstream candies, especially those deeply tied to American culture, like Skittles, Reese's Pieces, and Sour Patch Kids, resisted widespread reformulation. The social divide. This created a divide not just between continents, but between communities within the U.S. Families with higher awareness or income sought out dye-free alternatives. Lower-income families, or those less informed about the controversy, continued buying mainstream brands filled with Yellow 5, Red 40, and Blue 1. Candy, once a universal symbol of childhood joy, now became a marker of inequality, where access to safer sweets depended on education and financial means. Emotional fallout. The controversy also had a psychological cost. Many parents felt betrayed by companies they had trusted for decades. Advocacy groups accused corporations of treating American children as second-class citizens. Reformulating for Europe but not for the U.S. public anger grew each time a new report highlighted the double standard. And yet, children remained caught in the middle. To them, candy was still candy, bright, sweet, and irresistible. Birthday parties, Halloween, school lunches, all still brimmed with the same neon-colored treats. Parents faced an impossible choice: deny their children the joys of culturally beloved candies, or accept the risks scientists continued to debate. The larger lesson. The story of banned candy highlighted a broader truth. Society's relationship with food is never just about taste. It's about science, trust, and how much risk we are willing to accept for convenience or profit. But beyond the outrage and division, what lessons remain? What values, cultural shifts, and food industry transformations can we trace back to this candy controversy? That's what we'll uncover in the next chapter. By now, the story of banned candy has evolved far beyond the simple question of, is this sweet safe? It has become a mirror reflecting society's values, how we weigh science against profit, culture against caution, and short-term pleasure against long-term well-being. Lesson 1. Regulation shapes reality. One of the clearest lessons is that policy determines culture. In Europe, strong precautionary regulations forced companies to innovate. Parents didn't have to fight as hard. Lawmakers made safety the default. Natural dyes became the norm, not the exception. In the U.S., however, the wait for conclusive proof approach left the burden on families. Here, parents had to become detectives, reading labels, Googling chemical codes, and deciding whether Yellow 5 was a risk worth taking. This contrast highlights a truth. What kids eat is as much about politics as it is about parenting. Lesson 2. Profit versus public health. The candy controversy also reveals the eternal tug-of-war between corporate profit and consumer safety. Artificial dyes are cheap, bright, and reliable. Natural colors are costlier and more unstable. For corporations, the math seemed simple. Why switch unless forced to? And yet, the European example proved that reformulation was possible. When pushed by law and consumer demand, the same global brands quietly replaced synthetic dyes with natural ones, without losing their vibrant look or consumer base. It begs the question, if it could be done there, why not everywhere? Lesson 3. Parents as advocates. Another legacy of this debate is the rise of parent-driven activism. From online petitions to class action lawsuits, parents showed they could pressure billion-dollar companies to change. Kraft's decision to remove artificial dyes from its mac and cheese wasn't a tea sparked by regulators. It was driven by moms and dads who refused to stay silent. This has become a larger cultural shift. Families are more skeptical of processed foods, more demanding of transparency, and more willing to question what's in their pantry. Lesson 4. A changing food culture. In a broader sense, the candy debate is part of a global movement toward clean labels. Today, food companies proudly advertise no artificial colors, no preservatives, or all natural. What was once a niche selling point is now a mainstream expectation, especially in younger generations who grew up amid these controversies. Ironically, the backlash against dyes helped fuel an entire industry of better-for-you snacks, from organic gummy bears to naturally colored popsicles. Candy is still candy, but consumers now know they have a choice. The legacy. The story of banned candy leaves us with a mixed legacy. In Europe, it's a success story of regulation and precaution. In America, it's a story of consumer activism, fighting against inertia. Globally, it's a reminder that what we eat is not just about taste. It's about values, trust, and the hidden forces shaping our plates. And maybe the most lasting value is this: awareness. Even if many children still eat neon-colored candy, millions of parents now pause before handing over a sweet. They ask questions, they compare labels, they push for better. That shift in mindset may be the most powerful change of all. But as we close in on the end of this journey, one question remains. What does the future hold? Will the world converge on a safer, dye-free standard, or will the divide persist? That's where we turn in the final chapter. We've traveled from the science labs of Europe to the candy aisles of America, from angry parents to corporate boardrooms. What started as a simple question, why is this candy banned in one place but sold freely in another, has unfolded into a deeper exploration of trust, responsibility, and the choices societies make for their children. A world still divided today, the reality remains fractured. In Europe, most major candies are reformulated with natural dyes, and consumers take it for granted that their food should be safer by default. In the United States, artificial dyes still dominate mainstream candies, though more brands are experimenting with natural alternatives under growing pressure. In other parts of the world, from Asia to Latin America, regulations vary widely. Some follow Europe's cautious path, others mirror America's leniency. The result? A child's experience of the same candy depends not on taste buds, but on geography. Questions for the future. The story leaves us with more questions than answers. Will global corporations eventually standardize safer recipes worldwide, or continue their double standards? Will the US FDA eventually bow to evidence and public demand, or stand firm on its claim of inconclusive science? Will consumer power, parents refusing to buy dyed candies, be enough to shift the industry where regulation has not? Most importantly, how many more years will children remain the test subjects in this sweet but bitter experiment? A cultural turning point. One thing is certain, the conversation about candy has changed forever. Where past generations blindly accepted whatever was on the shelf, today's parents and young adults are far more questioning, far more skeptical. Even kids themselves are growing up asking, what's really in my food? And maybe that is the real legacy. Beyond bans, labels, and lawsuits, the candy controversy sparked a movement of awareness and accountability, one that extends to every corner of the food industry. The ending that isn't an ending. So the next time you unwrap a bright, shiny piece of candy, ask yourself, is this just sugar and fun? Or is it a symbol of the choices governments, corporations, and parents make every day? Choices that shape the health and future of generations. The story of banned candy isn't finished. It's still being written in laboratories, in supermarkets, in family kitchens, and in the hands of children everywhere. And the lingering mystery remains. Will the future of candy be natural, safe, and truly global? Or will this divide remain a stain on something meant to be sweet? But tell me, when you look at that candy in your child's lunchbox, will you still see just a treat or a question mark?